guys, this is Curtis from Grand Patina. Thanks for tuning in. This is a little bit different of a series than we typically put out. A little bit more behind the scenes and kind of just talking through what's going through our head, what's going through our inventory, and what we think is hot at the moment, what we think is going to be special in a few years, etc. So I guess the episode today is really going to be focused on the 1601 or the Datejust reference. There's going to be a few oddities thrown in there, precious metal as well as steel, but we'll really focus on that kind of entry point Datejust segment. We have a few watches here. The first one, these are all going to be in the early 70s period. So this is, I think, from 71, a very cool 1601. And for those that, I guess, are wondering what the difference between a 1600 is and a 1601 or 1603, the main difference is the bezel that comes with these watches. So a 1600 reference has a smooth bezel, and a 1601 has a white gold fluted bezel. A 1603 is a steel turned bezel as well. So they all look very similar. Obviously, the precious metal white gold bezel 1601 is going to be a little bit more expensive, and the 1600 is also very rare as well. You don't typically see those. So you'll typically come across the 1603 or 1601. For today's illustration purposes, I think we're just going to have the 1601. So this particular Datejust is very cool because in general, these Datejusts that were made in the 70s, all of them have, I would say, a lot of character because there was no real standard variant dial. I mean, you see a lot more of the steel dials, but if you look at the types of dial variations Submariners would have, the Datejust just blows it out of the water. There's so many different dial variants. There's luminous dials, non-luminous dials, sigma dials, etc. And we'll kind of get into the differences in between. This Datejust, I just remembered, this is actually from 67. So it's a very, very early Datejust 1601. But what makes this really cool is that in certain lighting, this is not just a silver dial. It's got this lavender sheen as the light reflects from it from certain angles. So the things that I look for when picking 1601s out and these types of watches are, it's much like collecting Submariners. It's much like collecting anything else, whether it's a Daytona or a Datejust. You're going to want to inspect the dial. The dial should be ideally free of scratches, imperfections, etc. And there's always exceptions to this rule. So don't take everything I say as maxim. There's going to be dials that are tropical that will have more patina than others. And to some, that's more desirable. And to others, it's a detraction from the original finish. And for those that are new that are joining us, a tropical dial will be typically equate to a tropical dial as something that has turned or shifted colors or shifted in terms of matting or gloss. Just a different variable that's changed over time on the dial. So in this case, this is a very rare dial variant having that kind of purplish, bluish, lavender sheen. The second thing I'm going to look for is all the lume plots. Now, because the lume plots are so much smaller than a 5513 Submariner, 1675 GMT, you're going to get, it's more common, I should say, where you're going to get lume loss because the adhesion of a small little dot of tritium is going to be much, much less. These also, actually, Jimmy, can you grab me a UV light? I would like to show how these react to UV. These, unlike their 70s Submariner or sports Rolex counterparts, these will react. These will definitely react to UV. So you're going to see reaction there. And this is actually a good way, if you're inspecting these watches or if you're buying it from other sources, to actually see what lume plots are still there. It's a good way to see if stuff has chipped off, etc. But yeah, in this case, this 1601 is just a really gorgeous specimen. The third thing that I'm going to inspect, and some people on their third, on the list of like a checklist, right, if you will, they're going to focus or hyper focus on the hands. And so in this case, everything looks good. Hands to me, and it varies from collector to collector, dealer to dealer, it's not as big of an issue. I feel like you can find the old stock hands if they're service hands, etc. I would not let that get in the way of finding a good watch. Now, in the case of a dial, it becomes much, much harder to find a correct dial if it's been replaced with a service dial in the past. The third thing I check for before hands really is the case. And what I'm looking for is evenness in the lugs, right? And when I say evenness in the lugs, what I really mean is it consistent with watches that are made in this period? Because a lot of people don't realize that in this period, I mean, a lot of these watches were hand finished. So the quote unquote unpolished watches were still polished by hand by someone at Rolex. So there are varying degrees of size of the bevel, angle of the bevel, thickness of each lug. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of what each one should look like in different eras, but that is something that you need to do, compare, contrast, and note, right? You should see for unpolished watches a sharp, strong line on the top facet, right? Separating kind of the brush finish from the polish finish on the sides of the lugs. I'm also going to look at really the relationship of the hole to the top line of that lug, right? So that's going to be important to me. So case, because the Datejust and 1601 reference really doesn't have any bevels, you don't really have a lot to go off of. It's kind of like the Daytonas of the 4-digit Daytonas, or any Daytona really, because there is no deviation on the lugs. Fourth is really bracelet, right? And I am not a stickler when it comes to bracelets very much, in a sense that I need something date matching. A lot of these Datejust came on Jubilee bracelets, which wore out over time. And oftentimes you're not going to find a date code on the clasp. So replacement era code correct bracelets are not very expensive online. And you can still find them on eBay. You can find them on Chrono24. So I would not let that be a deal breaker for you. Servicing costs on these watches, they vary anywhere from $350 to $750. Although these parts and Datejust, part of the reason why I feel like they have gotten much more expensive is because the movements have been, a lot of people used to find these for like $2,500 bucks or less, and people would scavenge the movement out of these watches for GMT movements, etc. Because they are kind of well, they're not exactly the same, but they are very similar. So a lot of these parts have been harvested, but since then I think people have really appreciated the individuality that each one of these Datejust bring. There's a lot of different variations in dial colors, choices, etc. And we'll get into that in a sec. But really cool 1601 Datejust here. Let's move on to this blue dial. And I'm actually going to bring up both so you can kind of compare and contrast. This one, sorry. This is from, I think, 1971, 72. Don't quote me, because I may be wrong. But you'll notice that even on between these two watches, even the indices are a little bit different, right? Your 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock indice on this blue one are a bit thicker than the other indices on this dial. And this is a kind of blue sunburst anodized dial with really creamy yellow, orangish, if you will, lume plots. This is also called a Sigma dial. And if you look at the Sigma logo, it's in front of T-Swiss T on the 6 o'clock plots. So this is what we call a Sigma dial. And if you actually compare and contrast, you can see that this 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock indice is uniform throughout the rest of the dial. So these are the little small variances that I think a lot of people appreciate in this reference. This is also a 1601. And let's bring up the last one, which I think is probably the rarest of the three. This can be mistaken as just another blue dial Datejust. But as you can see on the dial, this is called a mosaic dial. It looks almost like stacked mosaics. And non-sigma, but it almost has a purplish color to it as well. But this is also made in the early 70s. So just to show the different variances, even the font, even the color, this almost appears a little bit more white than this one. Pricing for these, right? If you're looking at like where do you get in, what's a good price, these things have almost tripled in value over the years. I remember hunting for these in Japan, and we would sometimes find them for $1,800. Usually the average mean was about $2,300, $2,400 back in 2013, 2014. I know that seems like a long time ago, but these were stagnant in that price range for such a long time. Now you're going to see Datejust with rare dials in excellent condition like this, climbing closer to $8,000, $9,000. And some of the more rare ones on Oyster bracelets or rivet with box and papers, they'll likely go over 10. Your average mean for these are going to be in that $5,000, $6,000 range for excellent pieces with lume all intact, excellent condition cases, etc. So yes, they've gone up as much with anything else vintage Rolex related, but in terms of rarity, in terms of like something truly individual, I don't think you can get much better than picking up a rare dial Datejust. And let me bring up this last, well, not the last, but the one you guys saw initially. And you can just see that, within a 5-year period, just how many different variations of examples that Rolex made. I think because of the price point, Rolex made a lot of different dial variations to express the individuality of these Datejusts. As opposed to a Rolex Submariner, where you're going to really just fixate on one type of dial and its luminous plots, etc. It's pretty standard. The next one we have is a matte dial, almost going tropical, 1601/8. This one comes on a rivet Oyster bracelet, which is very, very rare. And I believe this is from 1971. But most people associate 36 millimeter precious metal watches to dates. And in certain dial configurations, in certain dials, I think like stone dials, etc., I really prefer the Datejust over the date. And I know that that seems kind of contrary. It's almost like, I would say, the 5513 to a 1680, where there's a date functionality on the 1680, but most purists and most collectors would argue that the 5513 is more desirable because it's more symmetrical, it's more about the dial, and that's really how I feel about some of these precious metal Datejusts that don't clutter the dial on the 36 millimeter dial. You're really not allowed a lot of real estate. So in this variation, I much prefer not having the day on the top. Oftentimes because of that, you have a little bit more room and you have a larger coronet or crown appearing on the dial. So this one is going to be much more expensive than your steel variant for obvious reasons, because not only is it in excellent condition, but this bracelet's a very, very rare bracelet to be seen, and this is just a killer watch. So we're going to jump forward a generation or two and actually talk about the 16238. This is a Datejust that was made in the early 90s. This is 1990, I believe, and it's a stone dial onyx. We've had a few of these in our shop over the years, and it's just one of those crazy dials that looks very simple, and it is, right? But stone dials are notorious on Datejust and day dates for having inclusions, having cracks, having spidering, etc. So that's one thing that you would have to check on these stone dials. So there are also a lot of different aftermarket dials that are also cut from stone. So it's important to focus on the logo. It's important to focus on the font, the size of date windows, et cetera, to determine whether something is original factory Rolex or something's aftermarket. On this specific example, we have the 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock points with numeric logos as well as a diamond in it. And so I just think it's a very cool, odd Datejust for its time. These are going in the mid to very high, mid 20s to mid 30s, depending on whether it comes with a bracelet or not. But another just really very cool Rolex to find. And most of these also, this is one thing that was pointed out to me earlier, but if you look at the clasps on these yellow gold models, you'll notice that the clasp is a little bit more copperish, a little bit more pink or yellow, right? I would say pink, than compared to the rest of the bracelet. And this is because there is a bit of copper mixed into the clasp, as it's basically this is a strong point or a structural point for the bracelet. So copper is mixed in, which also kind of changes the color of the clasp, which is fine, which is normal. Outside of these, there's a kind of a sweet spot, middle ground for that 36 millimeter platform. And I know it's not a Datejust, but there's been a lot of activity around the Oysterquartz. Now, so I think these were the black sheep of Rolex for many, many decades. And what I love about these watches are that they look very much like an AP or Nautilus in the case shape. That's largely because it was designed by Joe Genta. So this is one of those rare moments in Rolex history where they kind of looked at what the Japanese market was doing. They saw that there was this whole craze and leapfrog in technology of using quartz movements, and Rolex kind of took a back step and tried to mimic and make it their own what quartz could mean to them. So this is a kind of quartz automatic hybrid mechanical movement, if you will. And for me, I think I'm less interested in, say, the quartz movement, although it is a hallmark of this reference. And I'm more interested in the K-shape and design, the integrated bracelet. I feel like this is the watch for someone that wants an AP, but at the same time, is a big Rolex fan. And this is something that Rolex, I feel like, will never ever recreate and reintroduce. Never say never, but it'll be great if they did. But these watches were, I think, in the precious metal side, 19018. I would say, and I don't want to date this video because you're going to watch this a year from now and you're going to say, no way we can find watches for this price. But they were in the $9,000 price range 2 years ago, probably pre-COVID. And now they're 13 to 18,000, if not more, sometimes, depending on the right dial, the right configuration. There are also exotic dial day dates. I know Davidoff Brothers had this crazy one. Maynard, do you remember that one?
Yeah, it was 2 types of wood with a string diamond dial.
2 types of wood with a string diamond dial. So, I mean, if you're talking about rarity and you're talking about something truly, truly unique, I think you're going to find it in spades in these day dates and Datejust models, just because Rolex really got adventurous with the type of materials that they were willing to work with. So this is my wild card, if you will. If you're looking at Datejust, day dates, precious metal variations, and if you're not looking for the precious metal variations, there are steel variations of the Oysterquartz as well, which I think are steals. So, no pun intended. Anyways, I think that's it. Just wanted to kind of bring out some of these watches that we all had in inventory and just kind of showcase the versatility of watches of this era and the types of materials that they were produced in. If you guys found this helpful, drop a comment. Let us know if you like this kind of format, and we'll go through more of our inventory, more of what is coming in and what trends we're seeing. But otherwise, look, buy what you like, enjoy collecting. As serious and diligent as you must be, like spending this type of money buying these watches, at the end of the day, if it's causing you more stress, like maybe this is not the right hobby. Like this should be fun, and reach out to us if we can assist or help. All right, guys, thank you so much. See ya.